It's official. Italy raising anchor and setting sail for uncharted waters. Europe's boat rocked by an unprecedented populist coalition. President Sergio Mattarella approving an unknown law professor, Giuseppe Conte, as prime minister of a government with a leader of the anti-establishment Five-Star Movement and that of the far-right League are touting a flat tax, welfare payments to poor families, a pivot towards Russia, and the deportation of 500,000 migrants, a platform that flies in the face of EU values and Eurozone fiscal policy. A daring gambit to free the country from the shackles of decades of crippling public debt, or reckless demagoguery that'll sink the rest of the euro area with it. Will the potential risk play in favor of France's president? Emmanuel Macron has been urging Germany to quit wavering and get on board for the increased EU integration. Or, after Brexit and the rise of the far right on the continent, will this government in Italy signal the kiss of death for a strong EU? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Italy's populist takeover. And joining us, Francesco Saracino, senior economist at the OFCE, who teaches at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Thank you for being with us. Also with us, Yves Bertoncini, president of the advocacy group Mouvement Européen. How would you say that? European movement?
In France, yes.
In France. And joining us from Rome, Roberto Dalimonte, political scientist at Luis University, columnist at Business Daily Sole 24 Ore. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Yes, the winner is a 54-year-old unknown law professor. Before we go to our panel, let's go to Rome. Correspondent Josephine McKenna is there. His name is Giuseppe Conte.
That's right. He's a law professor. He's had a very distinguished career as a lawyer, as an academic, teaching at Luis University here in Rome and other universities such as Cambridge and the Sorbonne, but very little political experience. And I think he's the sixth technocratic or outsider who's going to be appointed to be Prime Minister here in Italy. So far, we don't know too much about him. He has an alliance coming from the left. He was proposed as a potential Minister for Public Administration when Luigi Di Maio was drawing up his proposed cabinet a few weeks ago. And he comes from a small town originally coming from Puglia in the south of Italy. So at this point, we don't know much about him, except that he's not an experienced political player. And the question is, how is he going to cope as an umpire with these two strong political factions in play?
With these strong two political factions in play, Josephine, just how unprecedented is this coalition?
Well, I think we're really seeing a transformation in the political landscape here, and two populist parties elected to start with, taking more than 50% of the vote between them, and really bringing together disparate parts of the country, disparate policies, even though they line up quite the same on immigration, rolling back sanctions against Russia, a tougher line against the EU. But there will be differences, and many members of the League coming from the north certainly don't like the idea of handing out money to the poor and the unemployed in the south, because there's still this perception that people down there need to work harder and they shouldn't be getting money for nothing. So we're going to see some interesting conflicts, I think, emerge, and it's going to be interesting to see whether Giuseppe Conte is powerful enough to stand up to these two young, brash political leaders who want to overturn the political establishment.
All right, well, many thanks for that, Josephine McKenna. We're going to ask Roberto Dalimonte. Roberto, one of your colleagues at Luis University, how well do you know Giuseppe Conte?
No, I must say that I don't know him. I work in the Department of Political Science, and I have not met him. I'm also recently new at Luis, so I cannot comment.
He's an advisor to the Five-Star Movement. Will he be able to be his own man?
Well, that's a good question. We'll have to see. This is it's an unprecedented situation, as you may imagine. We have a political government headed by a technocrat. We've seen technocratic governments in Italy, but never a political government with a technocrat as prime minister. What his role will be is all to be seen. Will it be a passive role? Will it be an executor? Or will it be a mediator between the two parties in the government, a mediator between the government in Europe, mediator between the government and the president? We'll have to see. It's uncharted territory. Hic sunt leones. Here are the lions.
Well, for that, let's go to Milan. Roberto Arditi is editor-in-chief of Formice.net. Thank you for joining us in the France 24 debate. Uncharted territory. Giuseppe Conte, will he be his own man?
Sorry, Giuseppe Conte?
Yes.
Can you repeat me the question, please?
Yes. Will Giuseppe Conte be his own man? Will he be the one in charge? Or is he going to have to, will he be taking his orders? Will he be playing mediator? What kind of a role will this prime minister have?
I think that we will have a political government, and the reason is very simple, because we have the two most important leaders for Five Star Movement and Lega into the government with two very important places. Probably for Mr. Salvini, the role of Minister of Interior, and probably for Mr. Di Maio, the role of Minister Welfare and Economic Development together. So this situation with the two leaders into the cabinet means that we will have absolutely a political government with a man, a professor, in the position of prime minister. But this situation can't change the characteristic of this government.
Can't change the characteristic of this government. You talked about the importance of a political government. I want to turn, Francesco Saracino, to you. The complaint has been made that a lot of times recently, the person who winds up as leader of Italy is not the person who citizens voted for. What will it be like this time around?
Well, no, this time is going to be different. I totally agree this is going to be a political government regardless of who's heading it. Probably Conte will be a mediator, as Dalimonte said, especially with Europe and with the president. He's not a politician, having two heavyweights within the government in very important ministries. The ministère régalien, they are called in French, is of course going to be very difficult. I cannot imagine a cabinet meeting in which he actually leads the game. So
So who leads the game? The biggest vote getter, Luigi Di Maio? You need somebody leading the meeting.
It will be, in my opinion, confrontation. Sometimes there are converging interests, sometimes there are not, between the two parties that compose the coalition. He will be maybe a sort of mediator between them, but more importantly, once they reach a consensus, I think he will be the nice face of the government vis-à-vis the president and Europe.
The president of the country who's asking to see the heads of the two chambers of the Italian parliament on Tuesday. That's standard fare?
Yes,
standard course. Yves Bertoncini, your thoughts about this change in the landscape? We're always complaining about political gridlock in Italy. Well, here you have an outcome.
Yes, and I should admit it's a legitimate outcome. If we look at the result of the latest election, I think it's a vote of mistrust vis-à-vis the Roma system first. I mean, the Italian system, anti-system vote at the domestic level. But of course, there's also a message for Europe. We don't know this new prime minister. I think the Europeans will wait to see the whole casting. I mean, who, for example, will be the finance minister? Who will be the foreign affairs minister? We'll see. I think the situation is not far different from what happened in Greece when Mr. Tsipras came to power on the basis of an alliance with the so-called independent Greek, meaning a radical movement from the left, radical movement from the right. And what we have seen is that even with technocratic profile, or let's say expert profile, I have in mind Mr. Varoufakis, there might be a confrontation with Europe. So we'll see. I mean, the ball is in this government camp. But I must just add that those who are watching this are also the financial markets. And of course, this is also a parallel with Greece. Maybe we'll come back on it. But Italy, what is striking as a legitimate government, but also a very, very high debt. And if this government is as in Greece, pledging for confrontation with Brussels and the world, will face probably a very negative reaction from the financial markets.
In their party platform, a flat 15% income tax for citizens, 20% if you earn more than 80,000 euros a year, something akin to a basic universal income of 780 euros a month for poor households, and also a few other measures, a lowering of the taxes on corporations, and recalculating of pensions by undoing those very unpopular pension cuts. Is this going to give a boost, Roberto D'Alimonte, to the Italian economy? After all, lowering taxes, that was the argument made by Donald Trump in the U.S. To help spur growth, or is it going to blow up Italy's public finances?
Well, I'm a political scientist who deals with elections and parties. I'm afraid that I do not have the credibility of some of the other people in the panel. I can only express an opinion. I think we have tried austerity for a long time, and this government wants to try a different road, which means an expansionist policy. Maybe it will work. You know, I am concerned. I'm looking at the markets today and the spread. I'm concerned, but I'm also open to consider a different path. Of course, the program that you have listed is really a wish list. They'll have to make choices at one point. But on the notion of having a more expansionist economic policy, I'm not against it. But as I say, I'm a political scientist and not an economist. I'm speaking here as a citizen and a voter,
Yeah, you mentioned you mentioned there the spread. The spread is, of course, the spread between how much buying Italian debt costs and how much buying German debt costs. And it's shot up the past 3 months. It was as high as 170 points in Monday trading. Is it fair to say, Roberto Arditi, that markets are spooked?
Actually, today it has reached 190 and then it backtracked. I think it
as high as 190. Roberto Arditi, let me ask you.
Yes, I am here.
Are markets spooked by what? Are markets right to be slightly spooked by what they're seeing coming out of Italy?
I think that the reaction of international markets are normal in front of a government with a program so strong. Now, I think that the situation will change tomorrow, because tomorrow in Italy the season of the new government will start. I think that the Italian situation is very difficult because we have the most important debt of all the European Union, and the new cabinet of government, and first of all the new Ministry of Economic and Treasury will make a very important job, because to put together the program of this new government with an economic situation and the reaction is the most difficult job for this kind of government. But my opinion is that Europe is our future, and we have to remain absolutely in the European Union and also in the European money. But now we have to understand that we have the election in Italy in March, and with the new political situation in our nation, and we have to understand that the two winners of this election are on the field with their program.
So here we have it. Both Roberto Arditi and Roberto D'Alimonte, Francesco Saracino saying, look, they've won. Let's give this a shot. Can Italy spend its way out of it effectively? Which is what they're proposing in their platform. Can they spend their way out of their public debt crisis?
Well, I think that, as Dalimonte said, he claims to be not an expert, but I mean, he said it right, I think, in the right way. I mean, there is the need of a change of policy in Italy, I would say in Europe as well. So this is welcome news that a government tries to implement that. I do believe that the way they chose to do that is not the best way. We don't have much of a program, for example, of public investment in their program. We have a tax. Everybody's complaining or focusing on the public finance effects of the flat tax. I'm much more worried about its distributive effect. It's a very much regressive tax in a country that has been seeing inequality increase dramatically since at least the mid-year 2000. So I don't believe that this is good economic policy, not so much for the public finances, which, if they do everything, actually might run through an excessive deficit for a couple of years. But more than that, I'm worried about the distributional effect of their policies. The flat tax would strongly redistribute income from the poor to the rich. And we know from dozens of economic...
So why did they put that in their platform?
Because they have in mind the same thing that Donald Trump had in mind, and not so different from what Emmanuel Macron also claims, is that by redistributing towards the rich, you redistribute towards those who produce wealth, and then wealth will trickle down to the rest of the economy. This is wrong in economic terms, in the sense that it has been proven wrong by lots of empirical work in economics. So it's old theories that they try to put to work. In my opinion, that will be a major problem with this, more than the expansion of debt, which is, of course, given the size of the Italian debt, a potentially large problem. But let's not forget that we have some space in that sense, because so far the ECB is kind of keeping the spreads down.
But
I'm not worried at all.
But if that debt goes up, and that's the question I'll be putting to Yves Bertoncini when we come back, what happens then? Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.
France 24 es rigurosidad, precisión y responsabilidad. Somos una familia comprometida con el periodismo y la verdad.
C'est une des seules chaînes d'infos où on nous laisse jouer en plateau avec des Legos, avec des robots, avec tout un tas d'objets.
We take a return ticket to revisit some of the key people and places of the last 50 years of world television news.
على فرانس 24 يمكننا أن نحاور أصحاب القرار من العالم في كل الميادين ولدينا المساحة لكشف ثنايا مسيرتهم.
Aquí en France 24 tenemos a varias personas de distintos países, algo que es un reflejo de cómo es Latinoamérica, con culturas muy distintas. Y allí es muy bonito encontrar que en el deporte todos tenemos algo en común.
Les femmes, elles sont souvent victimes de l'actualité internationale, mais ce sont aussi des actrices majeures de la géopolitique. Et d'ailleurs, on en parle dans France 24.
What do you want from your news website? France24.com, giving you easier access to information and faster for a unique experience. France24.com, the international news website.
Welcome back. Before we resume the France 24 debate, some of the stories we're following for you in the newsroom. The approval by Italy's president of an unprecedented populist coalition between the Five Star Movement and the far-right League. An unknown law professor, 54-year-old Giuseppe Conte, tipped as prime minister. The Kremlin and the British government defend themselves against a report from the UK Parliament that accuses Britain of turning a blind eye to the role of London's financial centre in laundering dirty Russian money. The new US Secretary of State warns European companies they'll be held to account if they fall foul of new US sanctions on Iran. And France braced for another day of strikes Tuesday on top of rail workers, civil servants to walk off the job to protest reforms. Those include air traffic controllers. Some 20% of flights could be affected. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate on the day when Italy has gone public with an unprecedented populist coalition. A unknown law professor was an advisor to the anti-establishment five-star movement. Giuseppe Conte tipped to become the new prime minister, with the head of the far-right league set to be the new interior minister. We'll talk about that in a moment with our guest from Milan, Roberto Arditi, editor-in-chief of Formice.net. Here in the studio, Francesco Saracino, senior economist at the OFCE and who teaches at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Yves Bertoncini, president of the advocacy group Mouvement Européen France, for the European Movement France. And from Rome, Roberto D'Alimonte, who teaches where the prime minister, the next prime minister, used to teach or does teach, Louis University in Rome, political scientist and columnist at Business Daily Sole 24 Ore. Thank you for being with us all. We were talking, and Roberto was mentioning that spread between how much buying Italian public debt and German public debt has shot up the past 3 months. 190 points this Monday was the height. Over the weekend, and there you see the rise of that spread. Over the weekend, the French finance minister drawing a sharp rebuke from the League leader Roberto Salvini. This after Bruno Le Maire stated that he respects the will of the Italian people, but...
I think if the new government takes the risks to not respect its engagements on debt and deficit, and also the cleaning up of the banks, the stability of the entire Eurozone is at risk. We are at a stage, and I repeat this, where every one of us needs to take a clear and lucid responsibility.
Here's the umpteenth pitch invasion by a European politician against the free vote of Italians. There's this French minister who says the next government has to continue everything done by others in the past. You can rest assured, we will do the opposite. The French should take care of France. Don't bust our chops.
Is he right, Roberto Salvini?
I think... yes, I think Bruno Le Maire is not totally wrong, but I think he should be cautious in his expression. Only one reason, which is the France situation as regards public finances is not absolutely perfect either, and of course it's perceived as an interference. So that's why I mentioned
pitch invasion.
Yes, of course, but that's why I mentioned the financial market, because they will say, given the situation of Italy, if the new policy implemented is correct, we can trust or not.
So are you worried?
They will judge.
Are you worried?
I'm worried not only about the fiscal policy we have just mentioned, but also, concerning the fragility of the Italian banking sector, because it has not been perfectly restructured given the crisis. We have seen such restructuring in countries, very harsh restructuring in Ireland, for example, in Spain. And I heard that, there is a doubt. So not only the public side, let's say the Greek problem, the Portuguese model, but also the private banking side, which is what happened in Ireland or Spain. So if you combine the two, yes, there can be a negative reaction from the market. So of course, Europe is better organized now because given the crisis, there were tools. The ECB has implemented new tools. And Mario Draghi will be concerned, as an Italian, by what happened in his native country. We have the European Stability Mechanism, which has been used to rescue Greece, Ireland, and other countries. So there are tools. And by the way, the Italians recently, they had better performances than the French as regard their public accounts. It was more or less under control. They had even an accident, a structural accident. The problem is the old debt. Old debt.
And the voters are fed up. They're tired of belt tightening, and they're tired of being the ones they feel to shoulder the burden of the migrant crisis.
I agree, but on this, the major difference, if you look at the ECOFIN challenges, the financial markets are the key actors. If you look at the migrant crisis, this is a fairly political crisis. And of course, in this field, the Italians will ask, for example, more solidarity from Europe, including from France, by the way. And I think on this, they will be right. But the major difference with the ECOFIN, the economic and financial challenges, is that there is a third actor. It's not only a confrontation between Italy and Europe, Brussels, Berlin, call it what you want. Financial markets, they are watching. And then I think the Italian government should be very cautious.
Roberto Arditi, you agree?
Sorry?
My opinion is very simple. I think that for the new Italian government, the European situation is very important, and the new government will stay in Europe. But I think that it's wrong if we say that in Europe everything is okay. If we take the results of the election in Poland, Austria, Hungary, and Greece, or if we take the situation in Spain, for example, the Catalonia situation is a big problem for Europe. And if we take the vote in UK, the first nation who decided to go out of the European Union. My opinion is very simple. I think that now we are here this evening in your TV show speaking about the Italian situation. But the situation in all of the Europe is in a change, is changing in this last year. And we have to understand why the opinion of the European people, not only Italian people, but also in Greece, Poland, UK, Hungary, Austria, Spain, are changing. This complex European situation is the most important political problem of the European Union.
And do you approve this pivot towards Moscow, the call for the lifting of sanctions against Russia that's in the platform of the new government?
My opinion is that the Italian government will stay with the European decision. And I think that this is the most important position for Italian decision. And I hope that the Italian government will not decide alone.
Roberto Dalimonte, I'm listening to Roberto Arditi, and it sounds like, well, after the bluster and the surprise of this unprecedented coalition, things won't be all that different?
No, they will be different. There will be definitely differences in terms of relations with Europe, with Brussels and Berlin and Paris. We're going to see a new ball game here with a series of actions and reactions, which I hope will produce compromises that we can live with and not reinforce each other's negative attitudes. It will be a completely new ball game, and the outcome it's highly uncertain at this stage. Much will depend from Brussels and Berlin and Paris reactions to the policies which the new government will introduce.
Yeah, and we're going to get perhaps a flavor of that when Eurozone finance ministers meet on Thursday. They're going to be trying to press on with a big reform plan for the June EU summit. The final outcome is more likely, though, to be watered down. Here's one comment by the chief economist at Commerzbank, Jörg Kremer. He says, if the Italians agree on a government program, French President Macron's EU reform plans are likely to have largely failed once and for all. Such an Italian government would appear irresponsible in fiscal policy terms and further reduce the willingness of many voters in the north of the Eurozone to support Macron's plans for more distribution of risks and income. Do you agree with that statement, Francesco Saracino?
I'm afraid I do. And I say it really, I'm not very happy about that. I believe that, I think, as it was said by Arditi, that we have a serious European policies problem that led to a number of outcomes that are in some sense similar in nature in different countries, which is the rise of populist movements. So there is a need to change European policies. We say that many times in this very show. The problem is that I don't believe that the confrontational attitude of the Italian government will be of any help. We would,
because I read one remark saying that they might have Europe over a barrel, because if you're talking about the Eurozone's third largest economy and the debt balloons, someone might tell the president of the European Central Bank, listen, don't raise interest rates right now because otherwise you'll blow up the Italian economy.
Absolutely. No, I do believe they have some room for maneuver. How they will use it, that's the question. And the question is that is
the euro in danger?
There is, no, I wouldn't say so. I think there is a discussion that has started a few months ago on the reform of the Eurozone, a government that is fundamentally Eurosceptical and more or less focused on national interest as the Italian one I'm not sure is the best ally that those who want a better Europe might find.
So do you agree with what we've just heard from Francesco, that basically the Germans can now turn to the French and say, look at Italy, I'm not sharing the burden on debt because look at those guys, they're just going to spend our money.
If you look at the Eurozone crisis and the, let's say, refugee crisis, one of the major problems was not only the solidarity problem, but a mistrust problem. There's a mistrust. I mean, I can help Greece, but what if I help Greece if they don't use the money correctly? And so, as regards populism at large, when we think of populism in Europe, we should really consider the fact that they are totally opposite and contradictory populism. In Italy, there is the will to have more solidarity as regards refugee relocation. But in Poland, in Hungary, it's exactly the opposite. No solidarity. And it was exactly the same for the Eurozone crisis. In Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland party was established because they were against any solidarity in the Eurozone crisis. So, I mean, the difficulty we have in Europe in what I call this kind of co-owners crisis, countries, apart from the UK, it's a very specific case. They don't want to leave. They want to stay in the majority, but they argue all the time on the rules of governance as regard the euro. And I agree with you, it's not a good way if you want to build trust. Even if you have good arguments, and Italy would have good argument, both on the ECOFIN side and the refugee side, if you're in a confrontation, and if I may, if you are from parties which have no natural allies in Europe, in France. In France, the only allies of the junior partner, the Lega, is an anti-system movement, extreme right movement, Marine Le Pen. The Cinque Stelle movement, what is a lie? Where are they? So if you are in a European Council, if you are in the ECOFIN Council, you don't have a lie. So you need to be even more cautious. And if not, absolutely convinced that it's totally counterproductive. Yes, it is. Politically, it is.
And do you agree with that German banker that we quoted, that this alliance is the final nail in the coffin for Emmanuel Macron's ambition to get the Germans on board for more risk sharing and EU zone integration?
Depending on who will be the finance minister in particular and what will be the program implemented, because 1 week ago, we have seen in the program that, well, by the way, it should be good to erase, 200 billion euros of debt. This is not possible. I mean, from the Germans' point of view, from the financial market point of view. So depending on what will happen in the next few days, if not weeks.
If I may add, so, I mean, there is also hope that it's a little bit what Macron said. I mean, that maybe this would be something that finally pushes Germany to get out of this lethargy that has been crippling it since at least September. I mean, Germany doesn't have a position. They're just a huge sleeping giant in Europe. So maybe that is the nth bell that rings, and maybe that bell they will wake them up.
Which brings us to the leader of the Five Star Movement, 31-year-old Luigi Di Maio. Roberto Arditi, let me ask you, you just heard Yves Bertoncini mention how his party, untested at the national and European scene, The only place we've seen the Five Star Movement govern, it's been with mixed results, has been at the municipal level. Your thoughts on how he's going to do?
At the moment, the results are not so good. And are not so good for Five Star Movement in Turin and in Rome. But these situations are completely different because I would like to speak one moment about Rome. The situation of the city of Rome is bad, and probably Rome is in the worst situation from a long time. And the mayor of Rome is not now is not in a moment with a good performance.
But you can't. You're saying you can't extrapolate from that on what's going on the national scene. What do you make of Di Maio, this 31-year-old?
If we see the election period, and if we see Di Maio like a man, a young political man with a strong issue, the performance is good. But to be a minister is completely another job.
I could ask the same question. I'll put it to you, Roberto Dalimonte, about his junior partner, the Salvini, who's going to be who's tipped to be the new interior minister, the head of the far-right league, as Yves Bertoncini mentioned, his party, which sits with France's National Front in the European Parliament. He's had several incarnations already, teaming up with Silvio Berlusconi. What can we make of him? What should the rest of Europe make of him?
Both Di Maio and Salvini are politically smart figures. I like to remind that we have seen a minister of the Lega Nord in the interior years ago. It's not the first time that the Lega has been called to deal with the migration issue. We'll have to see. I'm very curious to see if Mr. Di Maio will be able to do better than Minniti. But here the problem is that they won the elections. This is something that was said before. They won the election. This is what the voters want. Let's test them. Let's see how Di Maio will do as Minister of Welfare, Minister of Economic Development. Let's see how the Lega, Salvini, will do as Minister of the Interior. There is no other way in a democracy to deal with the demands of voters.
We heard at the outset of our show, and I'll put it to you, Francesco Saracino, our correspondent, Josephine McKenna, say, here you have a party which used to be called the Northern League, and which made its political hay out of treating Southerners as slackers, lazy, and now they're in a coalition with the party that got the most votes in the South. How long can it last?
It might last a long time because the Northern League switched its focus from southern Italy, from Roma ladrona, they say, the Rome, the thief, a long time ago already. When they arrived on the national stage, they started shifting their attention from southern Italy to Europe. So the enemy of the League has been in the past 4 to 5 years.
But 4 to 5 years, that's not a long time.
Politically speaking, and in the current situation, in my opinion, it's a whole age, actually. I don't agree with you on that. I mean, 5 years in today's times, think of 5 years ago in France and tell me if it's not a long period. So I think this will not be a problem. The rhetoric against the other is against migrants and it's against Europe. It's not anymore against southern Italy. Of course, there might be some part of their voters that are still uncomfortable with the possible revival of the welfare state, the way Di Maio wants to revive it with the basic income. But my guess is that it will be marginal.
Yves Bertoncini?
On the migrant crisis, if the will is to control better the border, even if it's difficult, but in the external border of Europe, which is the Mediterranean Sea, I mean, there will be a full support of the Europeans because, I mean, all Europeans want their border, the external borders, being better controlled. And by the way, there was a mistrust against Berlusconi back in 2011 because he had said, "Que me ne frega, I don't care, these refugees coming from Tunisia, they don't want to stay, I leave them go." So there was a mistrust problem. It's being solved more or less with the so-called hotspots in Sicily with the border guard corps. So my point is, if Salvini is the Home Affairs and Interior Minister, if he controls the flow, there won't be a confrontation on this, except if he's too radical and even violent. But the real problem will be the solidarity side of the package, because the Italian will say, well, we are on the front line, we do the job, we control, but the asylum seekers coming, we should redistribute them, we should relocate. And look at you, the French, you had said that you would relocate thousands of asylum seekers from Italy. And what is the result up until now? 635. 635. The commitments of France was much, much, much more. So it would be a challenge for France, by the way, because we have not shown much solidarity to Italy. And so there could be a confrontation, a real political confrontation, but not only with France, with Central Europe, with other countries. And by the way, this is on the agenda because there will be a meeting in June and also on the way to the European Council of June to revise the so-called Dublin regulation as regards how do we deal with asylum seekers. And so the Italian will have a say and they will push in a direction which could be contradictory with French position.
They could have a stronger bargaining position.
Yes, of course.
What about, there's a bilateral issue. It could seem a little parochial to some, but it's one that's gone on a long time, and it's in their platform to stop this plan to build a rail line through the Alps from Lyon to Turin. Your thoughts on that? Why is that so important?
Well, it's important. I'm from the other side of the Alps. I'm from Savoie, so I would say that I know a bit this dispute between France and Italy. By the way, the Cinque Stelle movement is very, very high in Val di Susa and can be considered there a green movement. It's not an extreme right movement at all in this part of Italy at all as well. But well, there are commitments. It's underway. But of course, they may say, well, we stopped the project. I mean, I think it would be a pity, but again, it has been said there's a legitimate choice in Italy, and it may affect this infrastructure. We'll see.
Francesco Saracino, your thoughts on this? I mean, why do they want to stop the project now that it's underway?
Well, there has been a controversy. I'm on the Italian side, so there's been a controversy that has been going on forever that dealt with both economic and technical issues. How useful is it? How rentable it is? How much it will reduce pollution? And all of that has never been settled once and for all. So there are arguments on both sides. The five-star movement chose from the very beginning. I agree. This is one of the things on which they said from the very beginning what they wanted to do. So now they won. They'll do it, and maybe there will be very high economic costs, I guess.
One final question. I'm going to put it to you, Roberto Arditi. People say, well, whenever people think, some new coalition, some new politician, some new party is going to come in and completely shake up the system in Italy, there's always these institutions that slow everything down. At the end of the day, will it be the same old usual paralysis?
I'm not sure that I understood exactly your question. Can you repeat your last words?
Are they going to do what they say they're going to do, or is the Italian political system built in such a way that, well, nothing much ever gets done anyway?
So I don't understand exactly. But this.
How much of their system how much of their platform are they going to get done, this new coalition?
How much?
How much will they do in the program that they've promised?
No, there's a problem with the line.
There's a problem with the line? All right. I'll put the question then to you, Roberto D'Alimonte, very briefly.
Well, you're referring to the bureaucratic inertia, I suppose, of the Italian system. And yes, this new government will have to face the same issue. And much of what they say will have to be compromised with a very strong and, in many sectors, inefficient bureaucracy. Is this the question you were asking?
It was indeed. So we know that
Yes.
come what may in Italy, things, well, they'll get slowed down by the cold, hard reality of how things get done. Roberto D'Alimonte, I want to thank you. I want to thank Roberto Arditi for being with us from Milan, Yves Bertoncini, Francesco Saracino. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.